From B Media Production, this is B Podcasting. Engage your audience with podcasts.
Hi, and welcome to episode 4 of season 2. I'm Nick Schildberger. Today, we hear from an Australian company which helps you test the usability issues with your website. And they have a podcast which has attracted some deep engagement for their brand. But before that, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and podcast aficionado, Chris Ashmore.
G'day, Nick. Yes, the Australian Podcasting Awards are very, very soon, and we're all excited. They're on the 5th of May, to be exact, at the Melba Spiegel tent, if that's how you pronounce it, in Collingwood in Melbourne. Still a few tickets available for those who want to join, but if you can't make it, they'll broadcast live on the web, as they did last year. So go to australianpodcastawards.com for more details. They're also in our show notes.
And this year, Chris, you're a judge.
I am. I've listened to dozens upon dozens of different podcasts, and there are 12 categories, 12 self-nominated categories, as well as 4 other special categories. So business, there's storytelling, documentary style, family and kids, a whole range of them. So it just shows the breadth of what can be done with audio content now that, we know about.
Well, we're going to both be there on the night, as well as our Director of Audio, Peter Lett. So if you're listening and you want to come along, say hi to us. Now, who are you talking to on today's episode?
Ben Newton, Nick. He's the product lead at Loop 11. Now, Loop 11's a website user testing tool, quite a successful Aussie company. It diagnoses any website issues related to navigation or overall usability. So, Nick, it's all to do with UX, or user experience. So what Ben's done is he's dived into LX, or listener experience, to tell the story about UX. You like how I've threaded the UX and LX in together there?
Very nice, yes.
Now, Ben has taken it up on himself to produce the company's podcast. Not an easy feat. I mean, he spends 40, 50, 60 hours per episode for some of them. He's done an amazing job, and they really are quite brilliant. So here's the interview. Well, firstly, Ben, welcome. Loop 11 has its own branded podcast. It's called True North. Why did you start it, and what kind of topics do you cover?
My role is in part to do with growth and marketing. Nowhere in my job description does it talk about podcasting, but I'm a podcasting nerd, and I saw that as a way that we could potentially contribute to the community, being the user experience and customer experience design community. That's our target market and our target listeners. A way to engage with them that you can't really do through blogs or articles. You could argue that you could have similar engagement through conference sponsorship, maybe if you had a booth, but I'd say not, and also they come with hefty price tags. So it was a way to be seen to be giving rather than taking, and aligning the brand with the kind of people and companies that we felt were right for us, basically.
So with the target audience, are you looking specifically in Australia or overseas?
No, so over 50% of our listeners are in America, and then Australia and Canada are about on par for our second largest listener base. But if we were to say geographically targeting anywhere, it would be America, but that aim was more by who we're speaking to rather than specifically who we want to listen. We're happy to take listeners from anywhere in the world, and we do have people from all over listening.
When you mean speaking to, you mean the guests on the show?
Yeah, sorry. So companies and professionals that we speak to are predominantly American. They're not all. We've had folks from Australia and the UK, but 60-70% of our guests or companies that we focus on are based in the States.
So the audience, you want to obviously build an audience in order to get clients at the end of the day. What kind of content is involved in the podcast to attract that audience?
So we're focusing on people in the customer and user experience industry, so people who are designing a product or a service and interested in how to ensure that it's right for their customers. Therefore, our focus is on anything that will inspire or educate them, and that could be from software products such as Atlassian, Google or Facebook, how they've done things, but right through to more of a outside-the-box design experience, such as looking at the user experience of Parkinson's sufferers or children that have anaphylactic allergies and systems built around helping them to get through, a bad time if they have a reaction.
So it's quite broad in terms of industry, services and products,
Yep.
but it's quite niche in terms of who looks after that position within a company.
Yeah, for the most part, it's dealing with how people have researched a problem and found a solution, maybe iterated a few times. But if anyone were to be stuck with how to move their product or service forward, we would hope that at least some of our episodes might give them an idea how to try something different or move forward rather than just standing still.
Mm-hmm. Now, you produce the podcast, what is it, fortnightly or monthly?
When we are in season, we release it fortnightly.
So there's a fair amount of work to do it, and you're primarily the person who's in charge of producing it and editing it, and up until now, the voice of the podcast.
Yep.
Can you tell us what goes into producing? How much time does it take? What do you have to do?
Sure. So, as I said before, it's not part of my core job description. So, I have to kind of carve out time from my must-do tasks in order to put the podcasts together. And most episodes are comprised of 2 to 5 interviews. Sometimes that's done over Skype. Often, if I can, I do it in person. And so there's that component of just getting the raw content. And the thing that takes the most time is the listening back to the interviews, cutting out the interesting bits, which most of them don't actually still make the episode. Mm-hmm. And then once you've got that, trying to understand what the story being told is. Like, you often have an idea beforehand, but then you can be totally surprised on the day with what they come out with. And then finally, there's the nuts and bolts of cutting it together, putting in music, writing the script, recording, and trying to record without stutters or missteps, which I'm no professional, so there's a lot of them. And then just mixing the sound and audio. So I could turn around an episode in 2 weeks if there was a need or if it was a clean slate. But with our second season, I started recording interviews in October, and we didn't release our first episode until June 2017. And so there was quite a lot of time there, which gave me the allowance that I thought I need just to let an episode kind of sit. Sometimes you just need to, personally, I need to let an episode sit for 5 or 6 days so I can try and listen to it anew again, much like our listeners would, because you can get inside your own head and not realise that you have certain assumptions, and so trying to come at it anew is useful, and you need time for that.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that you started the research in October 2016 for release in June 2017?
Yeah, and so research was probably a bit earlier. Our first episode that we recorded for season 2 was at Atlassian, up in Sydney's offices, and so I went up to Sydney to record those. We're in Melbourne, and so the actual recording was done, I think it was the end of October, and so the research was obviously done before then. Yeah.
Well, this is a question you might not be able to answer, but for every 20 or 25 minutes of each episode, how many hours are put into those 20 to 25 minutes?
Well, taking again that Atlassian episode, there was 5 interviews, and each of those interviews were roughly an hour long. So there was, I'll get to the total time, but I guess there was 5 hours of tape for about 20 minutes of audio. At least a third of that was me speaking. So there was a lot of cutting down there to try and make it concise. But I would say if I had to put a number on it, I would be guessing somewhere between 40 to 60 hours an episode, maybe.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
So you've done 2 seasons, you're coming back for another season this year. Obviously, those hours, you see it's worth it with the audience that you're getting.
Yeah, it is. A lot of our goals were not something that could be easily measured via, KPIs via a dashboard. They were brand awareness. They were making us a part of a conversation just in general with design and UX. A lot, through various communities we monitor, we see that people say, hey, go and check out True North. Loop 11 does this podcast that, and they might just say it's good, or it might answer the question that you've asked, or at least there's someone there who's talking about it. We wanted to also form relationships with experts that we had no prior relationship with. So be it authors or companies or just professionals we admire. We've now got those relationships, and it's difficult at the start. Before season 1 existed, it was quite hard to get anyone because you can't convince somebody that you're not going to make a fool out of them and put some piece of rubbish together when nothing's existed and you don't really have a track record. But now we've had 2 seasons, and in between those we had what we call a master series where we interviewed, in quotes, masters. And since about halfway through season 1, we haven't had anyone say no to being on the show, and we've had the guys that created the Facebook logo, people from Google who are renowned authors, and also just folks in medical fields like neurologists who probably don't get many requests to be on podcasts. And so having that backstop of shows helps there, yeah.
Well, producing's one thing and obviously putting a lot of time into it. How do you get people to listen?
The most useful way we've found to grow our listener base is to identify areas where we don't have a reach into and then try and partner with the owners of that space, be it a community on Slack or a newsletter based in the East Coast of America or just a well-known blog or partner company that isn't a competitor with ours but has a lot of listeners. So in those scenarios, we would say, hey, we've got this episode coming up. It's with this person. It's on this topic. We think would be really interesting to your users, your readers, because they never had listeners. There was always a blog. And we will give you this content. We'll provide a transcript. We'll write a 500-word intro to it, and you can put it on your blog and market to your users a week before we release it anywhere else. And so that's a really effective way of getting to people who aren't already in your listener base.
Mm-hmm. Did you have expectations before you started the podcast series of what you wanted to get to, and did you achieve those expectations?
In terms of numbers?
In terms of numbers or whatever it is you wanted to get out of doing the podcast?
Well, we've definitely achieved what we wanted in terms of the qualitative aspects, which is just creating something that we're proud of, that people look at and it reflects well on us. Unquestionably, we've done that. The last episode of season 2 was late October, and we're still consistently in the top 10 for the Design iTunes charts. And so that's just showing there's a long tail of listeners that keep on coming back, and we keep on seeing chatter here and there recommending the show. In terms of numbers, I had no preconception about what would be possible. It's obviously a niche focus, but what we're doing now is each episode is the equivalent of if we sponsored 3, 4, 5 large conferences in terms of listeners coming through. Mm-hmm. And so we're happy with that as well. Yeah.
At a cheaper price?
At a fraction. Most conferences, if you wanted to reach, conferences that have thousands of people going, you're paying tens of thousands to get in front of them. Well, each episode, my wage is the only cost, but I can tell you it's not tens of thousands an episode.
Well, now that you've done a few seasons, are there any lessons that you've learned over the course of doing the podcast, and have there been any challenges you've had to overcome?
I was pretty clear initially that if we were to do something, it had to be unique, and that would be the advice I'd give to others as well. Definitely do it, but be unique, because there's such a low barrier to entry with podcasts like blogs. Anyone can start one. Sure, you do need some ability to record your voice, but other than that, anyone can do it. Not necessarily well, though. So the first challenge was deciding what we would be creating. And so in the end, we decided a 20-minute-ish show that was aspiring to be somewhere remotely like This American Life or what the Gimlet folks are doing, which we're nowhere near that, but that was our North Star, our true north, to try and aspire to those. And we knew that there was nothing really in the design industry doing that. There's a wealth of just interview shows, which are fine, but they don't fill that commute, that entertainment and informative bite-sized pieces of audio. And I guess the other challenge was just doing everything myself.
You've touched upon it, but what is it about podcasting that makes it an attractive form of engagement with audiences to get the word out about your brand? What is it about podcasting that allows that?
Well, I feel this isn't a unique perspective, but it's like a conversation with a friend on the phone or something similar to that. It's very personal, and you can really communicate your message and personality, if you're a person or company, a lot more effectively, I feel, than in an article. I'm sure copywriters would disagree with me, and they would have a point as well. But I feel you can really form a relationship with a podcast, normally the host, but you feel you know them, you feel you understand them, you trust them. There's probably a really strong component of trust that is conveyed in a good podcast episode, which I guess why advertising in podcasts is so popular. We've had people approach us to advertise on the show, and we've said no to this point because we're not wanting to, corrupt is too strong a word, but affect that experience and that trust that we've got with the listeners. And I'm not against advertising. A lot of companies do it well and they need to make money. But yeah, it's the trust component that I think is conveyed well, and just you really do build a relationship. I feel probably in an unhealthy way that I've got a relationship with a lot of the podcasts I listen to where they don't know me from a bar of soap.
Well, final question, Ben. what advice would you give to any organisation that's looking to do a podcast and to do it well?
If they're willing to commit to doing it, definitely do it. I can't think of many scenarios where I would say don't do a podcast, but you've got to commit to having someone, hopefully more than one person, working on it. So whether that's outsourcing to a team or company that can produce podcasts for you, or having some people internally who can really focus on it, that's key. But beyond that, be definite about what your point of difference is. You'll get lost in the noise, and most people won't give you a second chance. So if you can be unique, commit to it, and commit to the quality as well. I won't listen to more than a couple of seconds of a podcast if the audio sounds terrible, and I won't be coming back to see if they've fixed it. So yeah, that's probably my advice.
There we go. Well, great advice. Thank you, Ben Newton.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wow, so he spends up to 60 hours for one episode of a podcast.
Incredible.
I think some of our listeners would find that quite surprising. If they're thinking about doing a podcast, they probably think, just a few hours and you record it and away you go. But Ben's really gone to a lot of effort and a lot of planning and preparation for each and every episode he produces. And it certainly comes out in the quality of podcasts he's produced, doesn't it?
It does, that's right.
And the fact that he spends that much time on each episode and continuing to produce the podcast obviously shows that he's getting a return on the time he's putting in. Otherwise,
why would you do it? I mean, a lot of podcasters do it for, 5 or 6 episodes and think, that's enough. And am I really getting any traction? But obviously, yeah.
Yeah, well, his KPIs are very realistic. He talks about brand awareness, being part of a conversation and then forming a relationship with those listeners, and hopefully that will then turn into work down the track. So I think having those realistic KPIs, he understands that the benefits will come if he keeps at it and he's providing something of significant value to his niche of the UX industry.
That's right.
And just on those outcomes, again, in that niche that they're operating, I like the comment that he said that more people are listening to the podcast than would turn up to a conference. And I guess, again, from a marketer's point of view, conferences are expensive and he can only cater to the people in the room, whereas his podcast is going to a wider audience than that, and he's probably having a more in-depth conversation because he's having it on a regular basis with them. So, well done.
This episode, if I can jump in, Nick, and the last episode with World Nomads, they're examples of doing podcasts in-house. But these are talented producers. Phil Sylvester, former broadcaster, and with Ben having the experience previously to do this kind of stuff, they really know what they're doing. But not a lot of companies can do that, who can be dedicated with the time and the resources to do it. So this shows the level of what can be done in-house, but most companies can't do it. So probably better off, we're going to throw in an advertisement for ourselves, engage someone professional that can do it and help you to do it.
At least just to get set up and give the guidance and get you started. You can work in conjunction with businesses to produce podcasts. It doesn't have to be completely outsourced, because having buy-in and ownership from a business is going to help in the end result as well.
Yeah, companies want to do it. Although they're learning about why having an audio strategy is good for them, but the next step, and this is where they're stumbling, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to capture good audio. They don't know what topics to discover, and that's where, bringing someone else in can help them handle that. Well, you know what it's time for now? What have you got? And I'll start first, Nick, if that's okay. Now,
yes.
The news that has the industry enraptured at the moment is about Google and how it is finally, belatedly, coming to the podcasting party. It's featured in a 5-part article in Pacific Content. We've got the links in the show notes. Fascinating reading, well, for us industry insiders perhaps, but basically Google Podcasts product manager, Zach Renaud-Wedin, says his team's mission is to double the amount of podcast listening in the world over the next couple of years, which is an incredible goal to have. And it means, among other things, to include audio in Google searches, just like they include videos in the searches. And so you can listen right in the Google search page, then and there, to a podcast episode if it's in the search.
This really is huge news. Number one, that Google have a podcast team, which was news to me. So that's fantastic, because it's really been all left to Apple for so many years. So good on Google for stepping up. And to step up to this degree, to put so much emphasis on wanting podcast listening to double, is just great for everyone in the podcasting world.
Absolutely. Now, Nick, what have you got?
Mine's not as exciting, but it's really a revisit of something I mentioned a couple of episodes ago. I don't know if you remember, but I was quite upset that I was having trouble playing podcasts on my new Apple Watch. And I was surprised that Apple didn't have a podcast app for their own watch. And worse still, in their OS for the watch, they don't even allow developers to create apps that allow subscriptions and syncing across devices and even volume control. So I was frustrated. I was trying to work out a way to go for a run and listen to a podcast. I've been informed that Outcast is the app that you need to do this. And in fact, I am using it myself, so I know it is the correct app to do this. It's an app that's been developed specifically for the watch. You can download podcasts and listen to them without having your phone with you, which solves some of the problems. It doesn't solve all of the things that Apple could quite easily do by making their own app, but it's a big step in the right direction. And if you're like me and you like to get out and listen to podcasts on the go without your phone, then look out for Outcast.
That's great.
Well, that's it for another episode of Be Podcasting. For more about us and how we can help you use audio content to build engagement, go to be.com.au. From all of us at Be Media Production, thanks so much for listening.
Be Podcasting is produced by the team at Be Media Production. Managing Director Nick Schildberger, Executive Producer Heather Dawson, Producer Chris Ashmore, and I'm Peter Letts, Director of Audio. For more about us, go to be.com.au.